The gate agent laughed at the old man's faded ID. Then 8 minutes later, the airline president was sprinting down the concourse, pale, shaking, and calling him, "Sir."
This whole thing.
You can't use this. You need to buy a new one.
But I don't understand. Sir, please wait.
He arrived at the airport before sunrise, long before the loudspeakers yawned. Awake, and the coffee machines started their tired, caffeinated song. His name, at least the one on the ticket, was Colson Hale. Thin shoulders in a weathered field jacket. A knit cap pulled low, a small duffel with one frayed strap, and a face that seemed carved from quiet winters. Most people looked past him. The way crowds look past early morning cleaning crews, grateful without noticing. He preferred it that way. He moved like he knew the place step, glance, assess. The habit never left. He paused by the window, studying the aircraft that would carry him west. A narrow-body jet with a navy tail and a slight dent near the cargo door no one else would have seen. On the glass, his reflection hovered above the distant wing. It was almost funny how time erases a man until the glass barely remembers him. He joined the small cluster at Gate B12, a young father bouncing a baby, 2 students comparing playlists, a woman in a blazer scrolling through a presentation she would pretend didn't terrify her. The gate agent Meera Patel wore the crisp confidence of someone who had learned to smile through other people's impatience. When Colson reached the counter, he offered the kind of nod you give to a stranger who might someday save your life without ever knowing your name. "Good morning," he said, voice low and even. "Checking in for the 7:15 to Redwood." "City, of course," Meera said brightly. "Boarding pass and ID?" He slid them across the counter. An old government card, laminated edges worn smooth, color faded like a flag left in too much sun. The barcode on the back had been scanned more times than he could count, and never once had it failed him. Today, it met a different kind of morning dot. Meera frowned, tilting the card under the light. "This ID looks very old, has a habit of outliving conversations." Colson replied with a hint of dry warmth. "But it's valid." She chuckled. "I mean, sure, but our system is a little picky." She scanned. The terminal beeped in a small, confused way, like a bird hitting glass. Another scan. Another beep. She ran the barcode through a second reader, then a third. "It's not populating." "Try, Manuel," Colson said softly. "I'm going to need a supervisor," Meera decided, pressing a button beneath the counter. And, "Sir, your seat is let me double-check co." She chewed her lip. "It looks like your upgrade didn't." "Clear. We've moved you from 2A, 227 East." The letters hung in the air like a dare. "Middle seat? Back of the plane? Noise? Elbows? Apologies." For someone with a certain kind of history, to 7E is a test of patience you don't ask for. Colson nodded once. "I understand." He did not argue. He seldom argued with procedures. Procedures were where the careless get hurt. Still, the announcement flickered across the gate display in real time. Hale C27E confirmed. A few nearby passengers noticed, not because of any empathy, but because humans are calibrated to sniff out status shifts. The students exchanged a shrug. The blazer woman peered up with the small satisfaction of someone who hoped karma was still on payroll. The young father adjusted his baby carrier and pretended not to look. Colson waited. "Sir," Meera said. Lighter now that she had the upper hand of policy, "This ID is actually, it's not recognized by our system. I can't take it." He accepted that with a small breath. He'd not come here for anyone's permission, but he needed their process. "To cooperate, I have a passport," he offered. "Then we'll use that." She leaned in conspiratorially. Honestly, this card, belongs in a museum. She laughed at her own joke, a laugh people use to make paperwork feel like a game. You want me to throw it in with the collector's items? Moments in life when time splits, one path where anger steps forward and one where grace stands still. Coulson stayed where he was. He slid the old card back into his wallet. "No, ma'am," he said. "That one stays." Security arrived the way security always arrives. Genial until it isn't. Officer Ethan Rourke, broad shoulders, caring eyes that didn't miss much, approached with the diplomatic posture of a man who has diffused more airport arguments than he has eaten lunches. "Morning," Rourke said. "Everything all right here?" "Totally," Mira answered. "We're just as ideas, vintage. And the upgrade situation? It's fine. We moved him to 27E. Rourke studied Coulson like a man hovering between courtesy and suspicion. "Sir, may I see the ID that caused the trouble?" Coulson took a breath. He had not planned to use that card today, but plans are what the world laughs at when it wants. "To know who you are underneath." Placed it in Rourke's hand. Rourke flipped it, glanced, and something in his face changed, subtle but real. The edges of his mouth tightened. His eyes narrowed in the way a person narrows their eyes, not to be hostile, but because the truth rushes in faster than the body can metabolize it. "This is... Where did you get this card?" Rourke asked quietly. "It was issued," Coulson said, "a while back. It still belongs to me." Rourke turned the card over again, and his gaze shifted to Coulson's right hand, where the jacket cuff had crept up just a little, just enough to show a whisper of ink. A small geometry on skin, so faint you'd miss it unless you'd been trained to look. Rourke had been trained to look. Everyone else at the gate kept living in their tiny, loud worlds. Rourke's world suddenly became very still. "Sir?" he said, even softer now. "Would you mind stepping to the side with me? Just for a moment?" Coulson didn't argue. He adjusted the duffel on his shoulder and followed Rourke to the glass wall near the jet bridge, where the early light cut through like a line drawn by a steady hand. "What's your destination, Mr. Hale?" "Redwood," Coulson replied. "My seat is 27E now, though I suppose that could change." Rourke almost smiled. "Almost. Would you mind rolling your sleeve a little?" Coulson paused. In another life, in a room with no windows, the men who asked for his sleeve did it without asking. But Rourke had earned the courtesy contained in a question. Coulson pinched the knit fabric and raised it 2 inches. The ink bloomed, a minimal triangle framing a small 7-pointed star, a thread-thin line running off the lower vertex like a fuse. It looked like nothing and everything. It looked like the kind of symbol a teenager might get on a Darren-less. You knew, Rourke knew. He inhaled, exhaled. Then he spoke into his radio with a tone he had not used in years. "Control, this is Rourke at B12. I need a priority check. Unidentifier, Argent 7, immediate. Fa." The radio hissed with ordinary life, unaware that the room had tipped. "Copy that. B12. Argent. What? 7, Rourke said, words precise as code. Argent 7, a cross-reference with retired credentials. Possible Delta-level contact. Silence. A living kind of silence, like a new animal recognizing you from the tree line. Coulson lowered his sleeve and nodded his thanks without smiling. Rourke did not return the card. He held it like you hold a thing that once belonged to a storm. Mira, still at the counter, had begun boarding the elite's headset on, voice chirping through the practiced script. "Welcome aboard, Group 1. You're welcome to line up." She glanced over as if to confirm her victory in the small daily war of customer service. She saw Rourke's posture and felt a tiny pinch in her stomach, the body's reliable barometer. For when jokes age poorly, the first twist did not happen loudly. It happened like a pressure drop. The monitors at the gate blinked, then froze, the way a person freezes when they hear their name spoken in a room where they thought no one knew them. The boarding pass scanner powered down. The little light went from green to a vacant, watchful yellow. A text banner crawled across the gate screen once, twice. Too fast for anyone to read except someone trained to read fast. Flag protocol amber, hold position. A few passengers groaned. The blazer woman called her assistant to say she might be late. The young father bounced his baby a little faster, the baby unconcerned with any of this, interested only in the miracle of socks. Everything's fine. Mira announced, a cheerfulness sharpened by nerves. Just a small technical reset. She looked at Rourke. Rourke didn't look back. He was listening to his radio with the focus of a man trying to hear a single drop in a storm. Control to be 12. The radio finally whispered, "Hold position, do not board, do not move the subject." Executives en route. Executives, Rourke repeated. The word didn't usually belong to his frequency. Executive, the voice corrected, lower now, singular. Rourke looked at Coulson. Coulson looked at the runway. He had always known that one day the past would cash the check the future wrote in its own handwriting. He had hoped it would happen quietly on a porch with no one watching. But airports have a way of making everything a stage. 8 minutes is not a long time. It is the length of a news package, a walk to the mailbox, a song you hum because it knows the way to your mouth. And yet, in those 8 minutes, everything at gate B12 rearranged itself around a man no one had really seen. Passengers drifted into uneasy huddles. The students lowered their earbuds and noticed the shape of the moment. The blazer woman closed her laptop, the calculus of her day rewritten by something she could not manage. When the elevator doors across the concourse slid open, the airline president appeared like a decision that had been made far away and was now arriving at a very human speed. Lila Kincaid, dark suit, silver streak of hair that made her look like a woman who had earned every single minute of her life. Eyes with the kind of gravity you normally associate with planets did not walk. So much as move with purpose that ran ahead of her like weather. She was flanked by 2 operations. Managers trying to keep up and not succeeding. She carried nothing. People who carry everything often learn to carry nothing. And though she recognized almost no one at the gate, everyone recognized her. Power has a smell, and it is not always pleasant, but it is always unmistakable. "Mira," she said, not unkindly, as she reached the counter. "Step aside." Mira stepped. You do not test the tone of a person who has canceled flights with less thought than she gives lunch. Rourke approached, offering the ID card like a confession. "Ma'am." Kincaid didn't touch it. Not yet. She turned to Coulson, and in that small turn, the world clarified. Her posture broke an inch, which for someone like her is the emotional distance between continents. "Mr. Hale," she said, and it was very clear she was not reading his name off a screen. "Sir," a man nearby whispered, "is that the CEO?" A second voice answered, "Why is she here?" A third voice said nothing, because sometimes silence is the only sentence that respects the moment. Kincaid finally took the old card from Rourke, held it lightly between 2 fingers, and unlike everyone else did not flip it over. She didn't need to. Her eyes had already found the small embossed mark at the corner, the one that existed in a database that existed in no database. She slid the card back to Coulson with both hands, the way you return a folded flag. "I owe you an apology," she said loud enough for only him and the truth to hear. "Failed you." Coulson inclined his head. "Systems fail. People decide what that means." Kincaid breathed in. There are apologies made in public to be seen. There are apologies made in private to be felt. And there are apologies like this one nuttered inside a bubble the moment itself inflates around to people, while the rest of the world presses its face against the glass and tries to guess the words. Hey? She looked back at the gate screen, still. Pinned under flag protocol amber, "Clear the jet," Kincaid said to no one in particular, and everyone at once. "Ma'am?" One operations manager stammered, "Deplane the aircraft, hold the flight, and reassign the crew," Kincaid said. "Mr. Hale will not be flying to Redwood City on 27E. He will be flying how he should have flown, and the plane he flies on will not carry anything it cannot afford to lose." She glanced at Coulson with an expression halfway between gratitude and worry. "I should have been better prepared for the day your card would light my screen." The crowd shifted. Unease became curiosity. Curiosity became reverence. Reverence became an invisible current, pulling their bodies into the posture people assume when history slips by wearing someone else's shoes. A line of questions formed beneath their tongues. Who is he? What did he do? Is this real? Is this theater? But the human body knows when to be quiet, the way a field knows when to stop arguing with the wind. Myra swallowed, voice small now. "Ma'am, I downgraded him because the system." Kincaid didn't turn, but her words reached Mira with the accuracy of a measured dose. "You followed a rule that was never meant for men like him. Today you learned the difference between policy and judgment. Take that lesson home. Bring it back tomorrow." Myra nodded so hard she almost bowed. Later, she would call her mother, and her mother would say, "This is how we learn," and she would believe it because she had felt the lesson lift her chin up and set it straight. Rourke stood like a wall that had decided to care what it was holding up. "Ma'am, should we escort Mr. Hale?" "No," Kincaid said. "We should accompany him." They moved together a few steps away from the counter, where the glass gave the runway back to the morning. The light had turned brighter now, the low kind of gold that makes everything appear briefly forgiven. Coulson slid back his sleeve without being asked. The ink rested on his forearm, a simple triangle, a star, the fuse line. It was small enough to be mistaken, large enough to be remembered. Kincaid looked, but did not stare. Some marks on a body are not meant for the eyes. They are meant for the memory. "When I was 24, she said quietly, "in a building that no longer exists in a country no one admits we visited, a man in a dusty uniform signed his last signature under electric light and said, 'The ones who wore the star are not to be bothered. If they show up, you stop what you're doing. And you start being who you promised you'd be.'" I thought he was being dramatic. She allowed herself a breath of something like a laugh, though it said more about sorrow than humor. "I was wrong. We were very young. You were already very old." "I was the same age I am now," Coulson said. "Bars on a calendar are a poor map of a person." Kincaid's eyes flicked to the tattoo one last time. "Argent 7, she said, not a question. Coulson did not confirm. Some things don't want to be confirmed. They want to be lived with. "May I ask," Kincaid said, "where you're going?" "Redwood," he said. "A small ceremony. No speeches. Just a few names on a wall in a room that doesn't look like a room you'd make for names." Adjusted the duffel with hands that had done far more careful work in far less gentle places. "A promise I made to a man who never came home." Kincaid nodded slowly. The decision clicked into place behind her face, the way a lock feels a key, and relaxes because it recognizes the teeth. She turned to her operations managers. "Prep the corporate jet." It's jerked. "Ma'am, the CJ is now," Kincaid said, calm as gravity. "And tell the tower I'll file the flight plan from the tarmac." The operations managers sprinted away. Grateful for motion because motion gives the body a job when the mind is not yet capable of holding the truth. Rourke stayed radio idle at his shoulder, listening to a frequency that did not require batteries, double quotes Mr. Hale. Kincaid said, "Today we will do one thing correctly. It will not be enough for what is owed. It will be the exact size of this morning, and sometimes that is what you get." She tilted her head. "Will you allow us to carry you?" Coulson considered the question the way a man considers whether a bridge will hold, even when the sign says it will. "I never liked being carried, and allow us to walk beside you," Kincaid said. He nodded. Is that much he could live with? Gate, which had been full of people who had never seen anything like this and would spend years telling the story in shapes their friends would not fully believe. Hearted. The young father held his baby a little closer. The students watched as if they had found themselves in the exact center of a film that would win something you can't frame. The blazer woman pressed her hand to her chest without knowing why, as they moved toward the private corridor that spilled onto a stairwell no passenger ever sees. Myra found herself stepping forward. She didn't know she would until her feet did. "Sir?" she called softly. "Mr. Hale?" He turned just enough to let her words reach him in one piece. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't see you." He studied her face. It was not a beautiful face or an unremarkable face. It was a face that had grown up believing she had to be quick or she would be buried by other people's schedules. He knew the type. He had trained men who could fire a rifle the way she clicked. A mouse, efficiency is just a tool. It can build houses or push people out of them. "You saw what you were taught to see," he said. "Tomorrow, see more." Mira nodded, eyes bright with the kind of water that doesn't spill because the body wants to honor itself. "Yes, sir." They stepped through the door. The hallway smelled like jet fuel and old paint. On the tarmac, the corporate jet waited, its tail slicing the morning like a promise kept late, but kept nonetheless. A small flight crewler hushed stood by the portable stairs. The captain, a woman with gray at her temple and an expression that belonged to someone who had flown storms through other people's fears, saluted without meaning to. "Mr. Hale," she said. "It's an honor." Kincaid looked at Coulson as the wind tugged the edges of their clothes. "May I ask a question I do not deserve to ask?" "You may ask," he said. "What was the mission?" she asked. He did not answer. Instead, he glanced out over the field where planes taxied like obedient ideas. "There are stories that fit beneath your tongue," he said. "This one doesn't. It lives in the bones of the ones who were there. It's where it belongs." Kincaid accepted that with a slow nod. She had spent a career controlling information, and the older she got, the more she respected the parts that refused to be controlled. "Then tell me what I am allowed to know." "I will tell you this," Coulson said. "Once, a long time ago, a decision was almost made that would have erased a city and a generation of the children who would have grown up there. A handful of people who had no names in files. Only scars in the places shirts don't cover put themselves in the path of that decision and took the hit until it changed direction. If I am owed any seat on any plane, it is because the children are now old enough to buy tickets." Kincaid's breath caught in a way she disguised as professional composure. She had 2 children. One lived in a city that almost wasn't. She knew it because she had been told not to know it. "Then today," she said softly, "we will be. The kind of people who remember in the ways we can." They climbed the stairs. The cabin smelled like leather and lemon, quiet as a library where all the books are written in the same steady hand. Coulson placed his duffel on the seat. He didn't sit until Kincaid reflex baked into him by rooms where hierarchy was not a threat but a map. The captain closed the door. The engine spooled up. their sound filling the space like a vow. Before they rolled, Rourke stepped. Aboard, out of breath and out of his depth. "Sir," he said, addressing Coulson, if you need anything, my name is Ethan Rourke." He fumbled in his wallet, produced a worn photo of 2 kids in Halloween costumes. "I don't know who I'd have been if what you stopped had not been stopped. Think about that when I walked them to the school bus." He swallowed. "No, I owed you that walk." Coulson looked at the photo the way a man looks at rain finally arriving where the ground had been waiting for years. "Pay it forward," he said. "Don't pay it back." Rourke nodded, eyes shining with the kind of truth that makes a man taller without adding any inches. He stepped off. The door sealed. The jet turned from the window as the runway unfurled. Coulson saw Gate B12 one last time, the place where an ordinary morning had peeled back to reveal the wires. Inside, life resumed its pose. People boarded the reassigned flight. Amira's? Hands moved carefully, as if every ticket was a small, fragile thing. The students were quieter. The blazer woman typed an email she would never send. The young father kissed the top of his baby's head, a gesture borrowed from 1,000 better mornings. The jet lifted. The city shrank to the size of the story. You tell when you're trying to convince someone you were there for the moment the world remembered itself. Clouds took them in like slow doors closing. Kincaid sat across from Coulson and let the silence do its work. There are silences for waiting, and there are silences for healing. This was a silence for both. 20 minutes into the climb, when the sunlight laid a gold stripe across the floor, she spoke again. "May I fix one more thing?" she asked. "You've fixed enough this morning," he said, not unkindly. "Indulge me," she said. "The upgrade, the seat. That was small. The bigger failure was that we have built a culture where the measure of a person is calculated by a terminal. I won't allow it to eat another inch of this company." "You can't fix a culture on a Tuesday," Coulson said. "Then I'll start a culture on a Tuesday," she replied. "Our people will be trained to see, to ask before they assume, to weigh policy against humanity and choose the side that sleeps at night. And if they choose wrong, I'll stand between them and the first stone thrown." He considered that, then nodded once. "If you do that, your planes will be lighter." "How so?" she asked. "They won't need to carry as much regret," he said. They descended into Redwood's thin, fragrant air. Hills like knuckles, houses clinging to the slopes like promises people meant to keep. On a hill above a small town, in a building with no sign, a door would open later that day for a ceremony that did not want to be a ceremony. Just names, just the weight of them on the tongue. It's just a few men and women who would stand and say, nothing, because the saying is never the point. On final approach, Kincaid looked at Coulson's sleeve. He followed her eyes, then shook his head gently. "It's not a secret," he said. "It's a reminder." "What does it remind you of?" she asked. "That the fuse is only there to show you where not to light," he said. The wheels kissed the runway. The ground took them back. Taxi, gate. A quiet, private tarmac where hands were steady and feet knew where to go without being told. As the door opened, the breeze carried the smell of eucalyptus and ocean, the scent of a place that had escaped something and decided never to brag about it. Kincaid stood and offered her hand. He took it. This time he allowed himself the smallest smile, the kind that unspools only once the mission is done and no one is counting. "Thank you for letting us walk beside you," she said. "You didn't walk beside me," he said. "I cleared the path." He stepped out into the light. Later, long after the names had been touched and the room had emptied itself of the tears that had come to do their work and leave, Coulson would sit on a bench beneath a crooked tree. He would open his duffel and withdraw a folded piece of cloth in, faded edges mended by a careful hand long gone. He would press it to his face and remember a voice that had told him once, "In a safer time, if you ever get lost, follow the ones who still look for you when you're late." He would laugh quietly because he had been late for years. Somehow, this morning, the world had arrived on time. Back at gate B12, the day carried on. Flights departed, coffee cooled. Someone found a dropped boarding pass and returned it to a stranger with a smile they didn't know how to accept. Mira finished her shift and, on the ride home, looked at every person on the train like they were a story she might have been about to miss. Rourke walked his kids to the park and held the swing one extra second before letting go. It's the extra second that changes the kind of memory you're building. Dot and Lila Kincaid, sitting late in a quiet office where the city lights wrote their restless poems across the glass, drafted a policy change that did not look like a policy at all. It looked like a question. What would you do if the person in front of you had saved your life without you knowing? She sent it to everyone. She did. Not copy legal. Legal would cope. There were no headlines. There were no viral clips. There was only a handful of people who felt the day click into place. The way a puzzle piece fits, not because you force it, but because it came home. As for the Tattootha triangle, the star, the fuse line, it is the sort of mark that means nothing to the untrained eye, like a melody hummed by someone in another room. But for those who know, it unlocks silence. It tells you that somewhere, once, at a time, and in a place you won't find in any archive, someone chose the hard path. So the soft ones could still exist. If you ever see it, do what the moment asks. Stop what you're doing. Start being who you promised you'd be. If you ask Colson Hale about the morning at gate B12, you will shake his head and say it was nothing. That the airline president showed up because machines are bad listeners. And that he flew on a smaller plane because the weather asked nicely. Ka! He will say these things with a straight face, and you will let him, because some truths deserve the dignity of being disguised. But if you press gently, respectfully, he will give you the only detail he thinks the world can be trusted with. It took 8 minutes for the system to remember he was a person, and that every minute after that was spent by people trying to prove it. So, if you are ever at an airport, and the line is long, and the agent is tired, and someone in front of you seems like a stone, the river of efficiency wants to push around, remember? This morning, remember the symbol? Remember the question, and answer it in a way that helps someone you'll never meet get where they're going, even if where they're going is simply home. Tell me how this story made you feel. Did any part give you goosebumps? If you want more hidden hero stories like this, subscribe and stay for the next one. 3 times a day, we bring you quiet courage the news forgets and the world needs to remember.